Here are the topics covered in the President's Revision video. This video will focus on the theories used to explain or categorise a presidency. The Founding Fathers never intended for the White House to be a powerful office. Power fluctuates. Some presidents have more power than others. However, during FDR's presidency, the role of the federal government expanded significantly. The EXOP was established. The USA took on a full-time world leadership role. FDR expanded the federal government with the New Deal, and the pendulum swung in the direction of presidential power and away from congressional authority. Truman, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon were all perceived to have considerable power, especially with foreign policy. So let's look at if the White House is the most powerful office in the world. Critics of this presidential assertiveness soon materialized. This led to a catchphrase to describe the growth of presidential power. Arthur Schlesinger published The Imperial Presidency in 1973. The book was based upon two concerns that Schlesinger had with the office of the president. First, that the office of the president was out of control. Second, that the office had breached the limits set by the Constitution. According to the Schlesinger thesis, the imperial presidency was essentially the creation of foreign policy. He traced its origins to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, a crisis that allowed FDR to break free from Congress's conventional ties in the executive. To see how quickly presidential power had increased, there is no need to look back further than 1950. When North Korea invaded South Korea that year, President Truman immediately sent US troops and Congress barely raised a murmur. In 1958, President Eisenhower sent 14,000 troops to Lebanon. Again, there was no congressional authorization. In 1961, Kennedy launched the disastrous Bay of Pigs, and Congress played no role in that, or the Cuban Missile Crisis, which occurred the following year. In 1964, Congress essentially signed a blank check to allow presidents to take all necessary measures to sort out problems in Vietnam. During 1970, as part of the Vietnam War, Nixon bombed Cambodia without Congress being aware of it, never mind giving authorization. The imperial presidency might be the creation of foreign policy, but it soon spread to domestic policy as well. This is evidenced by President Nixon's policies to clamp down on anti-Vietnam War protests, which some argued had excessive use of power and force. Even the way Nixon organized and conducted business in the White House looked to some more like an emperor's court than a presidential office. The Watergate affair, which broke in 1972 and forced Nixon to resign in 1974, added fuel to the fire. A quick rundown of the events of the Watergate scandal. Watergate was about the illegal bugging and break-ins, the payments of hush money, secrecy impoundment of congressional funds, and obstruction of justice, all committed by the president and his administration. However, it can be argued that Nixon's forced resignation was proof that the imperial presidency does not exist, as it shows that eventually presidents will be limited in how they use their power. Congress's reaction to imperial presidency was reassertiveness. It passed several presidency-curbing legislation, especially in the field of foreign policy. The Case Act in 1972 forced presidents to inform Congress of all executive agreements made with foreign states. The War Powers Act of 1973 attempted to limit the use of troops unless Congress declared war or gave specific statutory authorization. The War Powers Act is designed to prevent the president committing to an armed conflict without the consent of Congress. It requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing armed forces to military action and forbids armed forces from remaining there for more than 60 days without the approval of Congress. Nixon tried to veto this act, but was overridden by a two-thirds majority in the House and Senate. It has been alleged that the War Powers Resolution has been violated in the past by President Bill Clinton in 1999 during the bombing campaign of Koskov. Thus, President Ford and Carter, the immediate post-war Watergate presidents, found their hands tied in what became known in the era of imperiled presidents. In 1975, Ford found he was impotent when the North Vietnamese communists finally overran the South Vietnamese capital, Saigon, including the US Embassy compound, which was in the city. Ford complained of congressional meddling in presidential power, further highlighting the imperiled presidency. Due to the electoral success of Reagan, this meant the imperial and imperiled argument was re-examined. In contrast to the failed one-term presidents of Ford and Carter, Reagan launched an ambitious legislative program and the Soviet Union collapsed, which helped restore America's self-confidence abroad that the US was the only superpower. Reagan's successor, George H.W. Bush's presidency was largely successful in foreign policy but lost power due to the 1990s recession. Clinton's legacy was overshadowed by the Lewinsky affair, damaging the integrity of the office further. George W. Bush lost the popular vote and became incredibly divisive following the Iraq War and the government's response to Hurricane Katrina. Obama took office in the midst of a deep economic crisis, and he initially had majorities in both houses or Congress, where he did achieve a lot. But he lost control of both houses eventually and was severely restricted in what he could achieve. According to author David Mervyn in 1993, the imperial presidency was always something of a cliché, as it sums up images of a president as an empire, a supreme sovereign authority, a master of all he surveys, which is clearly not an accurate description of the American presidency. What is apparent is that presidential power is limited. The Founding Fathers intended for it to be so. All this makes being a successful and effective president exceedingly difficult.